Welcome, everybody. My name is Jane Lavino, and I'm the Sugden Chief Curator of Education at the National Museum of Wildlife Art in Jackson, Wyoming. And on behalf of all three of us, I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. The National Museum of Wildlife Art is delighted to collaborate again with Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative. We've done a few of these programs in the past, and we always enjoy it. For those of you who are not familiar with the National Museum of Wildlife Art, we are a fine art museum focused on wildlife and dedicated to exploring humanity's relationship with nature. So all of these topics and all of these speakers fit right in with what we are all about. With me this evening are Renee Crisco, who you've heard a little bit from so far. She is the Senior Donor Relations Manager at the Yellowstone to Yukon organization, and our featured guest speaker, Alyssa Ravasio, who is founder and CEO of Hipcamp. The title of Alyssa's talk for tonight is a great one. It's titled Recreation and Conservation, How Can Recreation Also Support Biodiversity? And I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that topic. With all of our public meetings, we like to begin by reading a lands acknowledgement. The acknowledgement that I'm about to read is specific to my museum's location in Jackson Hole. So please take a moment as you listen to think about the original land stewards in your own geographic location. We acknowledge that the National Museum of Wildlife Art is located on the ancestral land of the Shoshone, Bannock, and Eastern Shoshone people, with many others having historic ties to the region. Please join us in acknowledging these Indigenous communities, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. The museum is committed to amplifying Native voices and increasing representation in our permanent collection. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce Renee Crisco. Renee has a passion for people and for creating connections. After serving Y2Y as communications manager for 4 years, Renee moved into the role of Senior Donor Relations Manager, where her strong communication skills enable her to forge important relationships with Yellowstone to Yukon supporters. Prior to Y2Y, you're catching on to this lingo, hopefully. We always call it Y2Y, and I think you guys do too, don't you?
We do.
Yes. Renee worked with academics and company leaders to develop communications strategies and community relations programs. Born and raised in Alberta, and as a skier, hiker, and cyclist, the Yellowstone to Yukon region is both her home and her playground. Thank you, Renee. Take it from here.
Thanks, Jane. Well, for those of you who are new to Yellowstone to Yukon, or Y2Y for short, our mission is to connect and protect habitat from Yellowstone all the way to the Yukon so that people and nature can thrive. And we're dedicated to securing the long-term ecological health of this region and all the critters that reside or depend on it. People, including each of you, are absolutely central to our mission. Communities need equal opportunities and rights to thrive, and Y2Y seeks to support human diversity, equity, inclusion, environmental, social justice, and oppose actions and policies that undermine these principles. Before I introduce our amazing speaker, I do want to just go over a few little housekeeping items. I've kind of talked about a few of them at the very beginning, but we'll make sure that we go over all of them so that everybody's on the same page. So we're hoping for smooth technology throughout the event, but it will be heavily dependent upon your own personal internet connection as to the quality that you hear and see. So if you have any issues, the recording of this event will be sent out to you tomorrow via email. We are in webinar mode, as I mentioned, so you should be able to see and hear us, but we cannot see or hear you. If you are having any challenges, please feel free to use the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom to communicate those challenges, and I'll try my level best to help out with that technology. If you have any questions at any point in the presentation, feel free to pose those questions to any of our panelists in the Q&A section of your Zoom screen, also at the bottom generally of your screen. We will have lots of time to explore those at the end of the presentation. Let us know if you have any questions. One of the values the museum and Why Do I shares is to inspire people to love nature and to get out and experience it. And as we saw, especially during the pandemic, people are flocking to our parks and our public lands. They're craving space and nature. And as Why Do I's president, chief scientist Jody Hilty often says, we need more parks, more importantly, places for people to enjoy nature. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited to hear tonight's speaker, Alyssa Ravasio, because she and her organization, Hipcamp, have innovatively unlocked access to more than 4 million acres of private land and help people enjoy more than 6 million nights under the stars. That's a pretty incredible feat. It all started when a number of years ago, Alyssa was looking for a sweet little patch of big surf beachfront to pitch her tent and watch the sunrise. But finding a camping spot was harder than she expected. That is when she got the idea for Hipcamp, a search platform for connecting campers with spots. After attending a 10-week coding boot camp, she developed the site and launched it in 2013. I have to say, just that alone is pretty much an incredible feat. But today, Hipcamp partners with private landowners across the United States, Canada, Australia, and even the United Kingdom, all landowners who are willing to host campers. Her innovative thinking is making waves. In 2022, she was recognized by Outside Business Journal as one of the 20 most influential people in the outdoor industry. She has served on the Outdoor Industry Association's Recreation Advisory Council. Alyssa earned her bachelor's degree in digital democracy and complexity science from the University of California, Los Angeles. She lives in the wilds of Marin County, where she's calling in from today with her husband and young son. And one of her deepest passions is shaping how the internet impacts our humanity and our planet. So I'm going to pass it off to Alyssa. Take it away.
Thank you. Well, hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And thank you, Jane and Renee, so much for having me. It is a real honor. I feel like there's so many people here that I would also love to hear speak. So I'll go through the talk and excited to share. And also we'll leave time for Q&A because I think the conversation will be really interesting. So as a bit of background, Renee already teed me up so nicely here. Thank you. I just met Jody actually a couple months ago, and Jody is the president of Why Do I. We were both at Half Earth Day in Washington, D.C., talking about different elements of how we might get to half Earth, and shared so much vision and values, and just very excited to be having the conversation and talking and sharing. So thanks again for having me. Hipcamp is the largest provider of outdoor stays across camping with tents, camping with RVs, and plenty of glamping. So if you're more of a yurt, cabin, treehouse person, we've got you covered as well. And our mission is to get more people outside. So we're really focused on our core goal, our core metric is that nights outside, nights under the stars that Renee mentioned. So that is what we are all about. I'm going to go ahead and move into some screen sharing here. Let's see. Also, it's gonna get dark while I'm talking. So sorry, the visuals are probably I'm gonna become increasingly pale here. All right. My screen look good? Great. This beautiful image from the National Museum of Wildlife Art. Thank you kindly. And yeah, so as we were sharing, we're here to talk about how recreation can play, I think, a really unique and often underexplored role in conservation, which I'm going to define broadly tonight as, protecting biodiversity, ecosystems, both protecting what we already have, that's great, but I'm also really interested in restoring and actually like making things better that perhaps we haven't been as good at stewarding over the past decade. So we're really here to talk about how recreation can power that restoration very broadly. So as we were sharing earlier, I started Hipcamp because I love to camp and it is too hard to find a campsite. And so the original site was really simple. I just put all of the different campsites on a simple map. I wanted people to be able to add information about, in my case in particular, if there was a surf break. That was the key piece of information I didn't know when I went on that camping trip in Big Sur. And so we really wanted just to make it simpler to get outside. And as we've all seen, especially during COVID, but certainly before as well, a lot of people want to get outside. And the industry, I think, is really failing to rise and meet that need, which is a shame. People need to get outside. It's so good for our health. It's so good for our wellness. And we really need that access to the great outdoors. So this was really the origin of creating Hipcamp in the first place. And as we've been building the company, we do mostly focus today on partnering with landowners to create new places to get outside. I've been learning more and more about this other very big problem, which I'm sure this group and this audience is very familiar with, which is just how quickly we are losing our biodiversity. And I was raised watching lots of environmental cartoon films, and this is protecting nature and in particular the animals. I'm really someone who's drawn to the wildlife. Has always been something that was a passion of mine. I never in a million years when I started a camping company thought these two things would connect. But when we started working with private landowners, it just became so obvious that they did, because as we're seeing this incredible loss of biodiversity, this 80% loss of global biomass of wild mammals, we just saw, I think 2 months ago, this report that said we've lost up to 70% of all wildlife populations since 1970. These are really big numbers that are happening on our watch. And what we've really learned, kind of accidentally, but with some good hope and intention along the way, is that camping and outdoor recreation more broadly can solve this problem by creating more places to get outside. But it can also help with this problem at the same time. And so that has really led us to this core belief that recreation really can power the restoration and the broader conservation of our biodiversity and of our ecosystem. And so what we've done today is we've partnered with, again, up to almost, over 4 million acres now of private land across the United States, Canada, United Kingdom, and Australia. And in doing that, in most cases, opening up land that's not been accessible to the public before. Again, tent camping, RV camping, cabins, yurts. This one down here on the right, this is actually an outdoor sauna that's available in one of the Hipcamps. So it's a really, diverse and unique way to get outside. A lot of these different Hipcamps. And so in doing this, again, creating new places to get outside, but also this really important income stream, an economic incentive for landowners to take good care of their habitat. And so I really want to focus tonight on these two big ways that I see recreation supporting conservation and playing a role in these huge and really inspiring projects like Y2Y, which is, I think, one of the most exciting things that we're working on today in the United States. So firstly, recreation can fund the conservation of today. We can literally use recreation to create economic incentives and real money in people's bank accounts. We deposit money in people's bank accounts, every single week. And so we're seeing this. And so I want to share some stories there. And then secondly, the role recreation can play in really creating the conservationists of the future, the people who are going to care about this, in 50 years, in 100 years. We got to get them outside today. So to zoom all the way back to the beginning, we first started working with private landowners in 2015, I believe 2016, around there. Public land has always been the backbone we're building on top of. You can find all of the public land on Hipcamp. We view that, again, as really this core backbone, this core infrastructure that we're building on top of. And one of our very first hosts that ever signed up, they've got a beautiful ranch, about 600 acres in Sonoma County out here in California. And she was getting lots of bookings, and I was so excited. I kind of couldn't believe it was working. And so I drove out to meet her, of course, and wanted to just get to know her and say hi. And I'll never forget, right as I pulled up to her driveway, she walked up to me and she had a piece of paper in her hand. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's like this list of complaints about the website and everything that's broken. But it wasn't. It was actually a letter from a land development company, and it was offering to buy her out. They'd, assessed this property as a really good target for either a big housing development or luxury hotels and condos and things like that. And she said, I hate this letter. I get them all the time, by the way. And I hate them because if I sell this land, if I even sell, part of this land, I will have failed on my entire mission in life, which is to leave this land better than I found it. That is the whole reason I'm here. And if I call these people back, if I sell part of the land, I'll fail the salmon down in my creek. I'll fail the owls and the hawks. And it's a really emotional thing for her, because she said at the same time, sometimes she's worried she's going to have to open that letter and call these people back. She doesn't always know how to make her mortgage every month. And so she has to keep an eye on these letters and keep them on her desk. And she handed me the letter and said, you can take this letter because Hipcamp makes it junk mail now. I know I don't need it. And that's the impact you're having on our ranch and our family. And I wanted you to know that. And so that was actually one of the first moments where I was like, oh, interesting. I was just looking for a good campsite, but that is amazing. If we can both have fun and go camping and support, incredible stewards like Leslie in taking care of her land and keeping it intact and connected with a lot of the broader public land in her area. So fast forward to today, this is a rough snapshot across the United States and Canada of the hosts that we are working with. There's about 15 to 20,000 hosts now around the world. In the United States and Canada, about 15,000. So most hosts are here, and about 4 million acres globally. So this has really grown to include just a pretty incredible community across different countries, different political parties, different age groups, different socioeconomic brackets, who all share this common thread of wanting to get more people outside and having some land that they would appreciate getting, the chance to share with others, and some extra income, certainly doesn't hurt. If we zoom in on the Y-to-Y corridor, we hand drew this. This is not a scientific representation. Jody's going to kill me, but this is roughly the Y-to-Y corridor. And you can see we actually have quite a few hosts who are in this area, who could be part of this broader movement of connecting, these two incredible areas and providing an intact wilderness corridor across a nation state border, which I love, by the way. And so again, there's about 2,000 hosts that are in this general region. So it's a lot of different people who we can reach and potentially, encourage to be part of this bigger and broader movement. Just to zoom in on one of them, this was a beautiful one. It's called Teton Corners. It's not the hugest parcel. Our average Hipcamp is around 100 acres. This is a smaller one, but in a really beautiful location. And I just loved what the host wrote. I'll read it down here. He said, Teton Corners has been a favorite fishing spot for generations. We felt we should step up and adopt it because we didn't want to see it get developed, ripped apart, or closed off. By staying here, you're helping to preserve this piece of natural beauty in Idaho. May not be the biggest preserve, but you have to stay somewhere. And so I think this is a really beautiful example. Again, the average Hipcamp host is larger than this, but I think this is such an exciting example of, a landowner who stepped up and said, I want to open this up. I want to have people stay here. And I have every intention of using that income to support the conservation and protection of this ecosystem. They actually go on down below this paragraph to talk about all the different wildlife that lives in this waterway and how important it is to keep open and well maintained. So that is, one of the 20,000 landowners across the world that we're working with today. I think something I've really learned a lot, again, beautiful photo from the museum, thank you, is really that, again, while public land is so important and it is the backbone, and I completely agree with Jody, we need more parks. We absolutely need more parks. We, by the way, also need to better fund the parks we have today, more reliably and more predictably. But we need more. We need to connect those parks with private land. We need to extend and enhance. And we also need to really create models that encourage private landowners to do the right thing. And this quote got sent to me this morning. I had never read this and I thought it was fascinating. So although Leopold, who I'm sure most of us are familiar with, shared, I think this was about a century ago, conservation will ultimately boil down to rewarding the private landowner who conserves the public interest. And I completely believe in this. This is everything I have seen play out again and again and again now. One of my biggest learnings throughout the past few years has been the difference between a landowner and a conservationist is normally money. That's it. In terms of intention, goals, value, I am yet to meet a single landowner who doesn't want to leave the land better than they found it, who doesn't deeply care about the wildlife on their land, who doesn't want to have clean air, clean soil, clean water for future generations. Those are like not controversial, up for debate topics across the landowners that we work with. What is something that varies quite a bit is how much income do these people have? And as a result, what choices may they be making or not making when it comes to, stewarding their land, keeping their land, and taking good care of their land. And so I think recreation and camping more broadly has a huge potential to really, again, reward private landowners who are doing the right thing and keeping their land open and open for wildlife and open for campers and people who want to get outside as well. So that's the first big way that we see recreation playing a big role in this conversation, which is genuinely creating the dollars, the money. And we're a small private company, so we don't share revenue targets or anything like that in public settings. But for this group, for context, we've generated over $100 million for landowners today. And that's in a few years of business. And we think we're just getting started. And so there's just so much potential here and so much untapped demand of people who want to get outside, but when they do, it looks like this and they're not sure how to navigate everything. And so there's just a big opportunity to connect those dots and support landowners who want to take good care of their land and earn some income, and people who really want to get outside. Second big reason we see recreation really supporting conservation is it inspires the future. This was something that really, I think finally fully landed with me at Half Earth when I was there with Jody a couple months ago. We were introducing what for that conversation was a pretty new idea, which was this idea that recreation has it's not a trade-off against our conservation goals. It's actually a really powerful engine that can support our conservation goals. And it was funny because so many of people in the audience and as part of the group, the foundation shared with me after, they grew up camping and hiking and fishing and hunting. And the idea that is why they had dedicated their lives to conservation wasn't actually immediately apparent to everybody, right? It was kind of this interesting moment of like, oh, wow, yeah, we do need to get people to have fun and develop that love and passion for the outdoors if we want them to have that, commitment to protect it. This was a fun photo of George O'Keeffe and Ansel Adams. I believe we've got a Rockefeller, a couple of them in here as well. And again, like you need these people to get outside, have fun, go camping, have a beautiful meal somewhere like this. That is the fuel. That is the inspiration and the motivation that will, lead them to investing in conservation, making, the right choice at the poll booth, or making that right donation, or making the right decision about what they support, what they buy, what they do. And so getting more people outside, again, Hipcamp's mission, we do view as very, very central to, in particular, the future of conservation and having a bigger and broader base of people who care about this in the future. Which on that note, I would be remiss if I did not really drive home how important it is that we build a bigger and broader base of people who not only recreate, but have that commitment to protecting our ecosystems and our biodiversity. So we think a lot about how do we get more people outside. That includes people who historically have felt unwelcome, have not been allowed in our national parks. Unfortunately, the US has a lot of history there that I think we're still really working through. And so today, as again, this group probably knows well, we do over-index towards white and older audiences, and we need to diversify. We need to reach more people. We need to make the outdoors something that is relevant and exciting and safe and welcoming to a much broader population, both so they can have access to the incredible benefits of the outdoors, but also so they can be conservationists in the future. And help us protect all these beautiful places. At the core of this kind of theory of change, really, that recreation creates conservationists, is biophilia, which of course, is E.O. Wilson's theory that we just love nature. You get us outside and we can't help it. We've got this innate love for the rest of the natural world that really gets fired up. And so we've debated over the years many times, should we change our mission? Is it too simple? Is it really get more people outside and, protect Earth's ecosystem or da-da-da? And we keep coming back to like, no, I think we can just get more people outside and nature will make sure they fall in love with it. And then a lot, kind of happens from there. So I guess really to put this in a diagram, because I can't not, our overall theory of how recreation is supporting this is, when we make it simpler to get outside, which is what, Hipcamp as a company is mostly focused on, more people will get outside, they will fall in love with nature. We believe most people are good, they will protect what they love. And when we protect what we love, we'll create more places to get outside, both through more parks, more private land that can stay open, could become open to the public for recreation, which feeds the loop yet again. And then kind of this first reason we talked about recreation supporting conservation is just the money. The money is really helpful. A lot of ranchers and farmers, I don't think it's ever been harder to be a rancher or farmer in America. There's just so many different things, from inflation, fuel prices, globalized economy, pandemic, supply chains, like it's pretty wild. And so, creating these new income streams that can support people in protecting their land, whether they're in agriculture or not, about half our hosts are, and about half our hosts aren't, really just supports people in my experience in making the choice they already wanted to make, which is to take really good care of the land and make sure it's there for the future for everyone to enjoy. And so with that, I would love to go to questions, conversation, and just open it up a bit. And
I'm going to, Todd Wilkinson just has this great question in the chat, and I'm going to just copy it and put it in the Q&A so that everybody can see it. Open. Why is it not going in there? Interesting. Okay, well, I'm just gonna.
I think is it
Oh, there we go.
Is there a question in the chat here?
Perhaps I cannot, but read out his first question. So Todd asks, what does conservation mean if it isn't focused on wildlife conservation?
Ooh, conservation means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So in this case, in kind of the talk I've shared with you all tonight, the definition I think I kind of grounded in earlier is kind of protecting our natural resources that we have in existence today, which I would separate out from restoration, which is aimed more to increase biodiversity or repair or rebuild habitat that perhaps has been degraded. And so what does conservation mean if it's not focused on wildlife conservation? I don't know if I can imagine a conservation that isn't focused on wildlife. So I'm not sure I understand. I don't know. I guess to me, conservation is so intrinsically going to include biodiversity and wildlife. I'm not sure how to answer that.
I'll ask one more of Todd's questions here before I move on to some of the others here. How does putting more recreationalists into a given area benefit wildlife living there? Maybe that you have some examples of some of the landowners who've done some really cool initiatives, perhaps.
Yeah, totally. I think, one story I will share that comes to mind is a farmer I met with recently who, because of the money from her camping, had recently started to partner with a university, and through grant money, but also through her personal funding, had started repairing some of the stream bed for salmon spawning. There'd been a lot of degradation due to agriculture. And so it was just a cool example of someone who was actually like taking that income and directly putting it into a project that does benefit wildlife directly. We also see a lot of that happen that is less an immediate benefit to wildlife, but more of a general investment in habitat. So especially here in the West, as I'm sure we all are familiar with, we're going through a lot of drought and a lot of fires, and those fires can be really devastating for wildlife populations, especially when they get as big and hot as they have been. And so for most landowners that I'm familiar with in the areas they live in, the responsibility financially of taking care of like dead trees, if like you've had bark beetles move through or sudden oak death, that's on you. You got to pay for that. You got to figure that out. Again, there are grants, which is really cool, but it's hard to access sometimes. It's not always going to cover it. And so that's actually a very common thing we hear about, is like, I'm using my money from Hipcamp to like finally take down these dead trees that have been like a huge concern for me. So I think that, you know, better land management, specifically with regard to fire, is something we think about a lot.
Francis Clark asked, are there any criteria for accepting those who you will list for Hipcamp?
Yes, there are. We do our best to be inclusive and really, you know, try to create an accessible platform, but I'll pop in the chat it's a web page, but there's a bunch of different criteria and standards. Again, we try to be very inclusive, but we are very focused both on having a good impact on local communities, on the land, and of course with a close eye to safety. So.
And I did, if I'm not mistaken, I read that every site has to have a toilet.
Yes, among many other requirements as such, but yes, that is definitely a good one. I'm just seeing in the chat now all these good people answering the conservation question, cultural conservation, land conservation. Yes, conservation is, we could just do a whole talk on conservation and what that word means, and in a lot of ways how it can be negative to people. That's something I've learned a lot about. I had no idea that people feel like, what are we conserving and why is my culture not part of that conversation? And I think there's been so much great progress that's happened there over the past few years, but it's a powerful word for sure.
Yeah, that is a really interesting perspective. It's, you know, whose values are we conserving at the end of the day? And how do we bring in the larger community to be part of that conversation? How do you connect with landowners who haven't heard about Hipcamp?
Yeah, I'll answer that. I want to respond to what you just said quickly, because again, we've got such a cool group here. I'm curious for more insights and reactions, but something that I've been thinking a lot about very recently is, right now, it seems the core metric around conservation we're tracking is easements, right? Like moving land into a protected state. And I think easements are great in that they provide that longevity and that kind of like promise into the future. There's a huge range. You can actually put like land under easement and then like spray Roundup all over it and be like, look, it's under easement, it's protected. And so I've been really trying to think about, how do we measure success around conservation? Because again, I hear a lot about just like acres under easement, which again, there's a wide spectrum of what that can mean. To me, the answer very clearly seems biodiversity, and like better measurement around biodiversity and like supporting a more diverse, healthy, vibrant ecosystem. But anyway, when we talk about what we're conserving and what we're not conserving, I think that's like an interesting, really interesting kind of question. And then how do we connect with landowners? Well, mostly they connect with us. So by far and away, and especially this past year, almost every landowner who's joined Hipcamp reached out to us. We do have a team that for specific regions will do outreach, and that often just looks like, you know, good old-fashioned emails or phone calls to people who we know have land in the right area. And then we do have some awesome partnerships with different organizations as well, land trusts, especially to reach people in areas that might be a good fit.
And if I remember in doing a little bit of research, it seems like Hipcamp really blew up in the last few years, and you attracted some really serious investors. And I'm just wondering how that came to be.
Yeah, so we did raise some funding recently. I think how that came to be is we got the company to a place where we didn't need it. That's been my experience. Investors want to invest in things that don't need investment. And so, yeah, I mean, I think because we are a company that's using, the internet to connect all of these different people, and really is a pretty, like, if you think about the whole ecosystem that Hipcamps exist in, we've got like millions of people who want to get outside and these like tens of thousands of landowners. And we're actually this very thin layer of software that's just helping to connect them. And of course, we have standards and policies and, do a lot to make sure those connections are as positive and as expected as they can be. But because of that, I think investors really like the model, because the same thing we've built for this region, can be 100 times bigger, and a lot of what we've built, should still work and continue to support all those connections. So
that's awesome.
I will say, just as a fun note for this group, because this is not someone you might expect to care about this space, our last round of investment did include Jay-Z, which is just like a fun fact. And he's really passionate about getting people outside. So
that's awesome.
Fun facts.
Very cool. Who I would not have guessed, but how appropriate in some ways. Very cool.
Yeah.
Alyssa, I'm going to take the next question from actually one of my colleagues, Hannah Rasker, and she asked, how does Hipcamp approach camping regulations when camping in sensitive areas such as grizzly bear habitat where food storage is required?
Yeah, so again, I think there's a couple of things I'll point to here. One is safety is definitely like the first big categories of standards. And so our hosts are, on the ground, know the region. I know in regions like that, they are providing bear boxes, because that is the only way to stay outside in those places and to be safe. And then I think, it's also important, if you kind of look down and scroll down around like citizen, be a good citizen, be a respectful host. We have some really important standards around following local regulations. And so to the extent that actually is something that is regulated for that region, that is something that of course would be important for people to follow. So yeah, I think again, the host standards are probably the best place there.
That's awesome. I know that with a lot of the work that YWI has been doing, for the last 25 plus years, we've been really working on reconnecting the Yellowstone grizzly population with those in the northern population, which has basically meant the grizzly bear range has really expanded. And now grizzly bears are moving into areas where they haven't been for 100 years. And of course, Hannah, who just asked this question, is part of a team who's working to kind of prepare the land and the communities on how to live with that. So I'm sure she'll probably follow up with you on ways that we can connect on that front. So that's really cool.
I would say that's like a good example of something we'd love to partner on, actually, because again, I think our hosts are experts. They know their land, they know the region, but to the extent that we can do more to create education for people coming into that area for the first time, who maybe aren't from areas with grizzly bears, that would be an incredible educational opportunity.
That's super cool. Well, Mike Mansfield asked, do you find many of your hosts are people who have gone out and purchased land with a specific intent to monetize it, or at least partially through Hipcamp?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Do you find that people, your hosts in particular, are people who have gone out and purchased land with a specific intent to monetize the use of it? Or, is it people who, may have been owning this land for a really long time, like that, especially that first example of that lady, which, by the way, I love that story, who saw this as an opportunity to stave off developers who would like to give her an opportunity to make some income. But unfortunately, in that case, lose the land. And she's found Hipcamp as a way to keep that sort of legacy and that heritage. Is there a camp that they tend to fall into, or is it kind of a bit of a range?
Yeah, I don't remember the specific number, but it's definitely in the decades of the average length of time someone's had the land who lists on Hipcamp. So it's very much long-term landowners who've had the land for a longer period of time.
Awesome. Francis asked, do you have any ecological guidance to landowners who want to be part of Hipcamp or connect them to others, like YWI? And we kind of had a live chat here.
Yeah.
about a potential partnership.
Yeah, so the challenge with ecological guidance we found is it's so geospecific, right? What someone should do, even in the same county could be radically different than someone who has a different, native species of tree or whatnot. So there's a few things we've done that I'll share, and also very open to cool ideas that people have in this group. One is just general, we've got like good best practices on how to create, some basic infrastructure around recreation that can be really low impact on the environment. So things like pulling back from any stream beds, knowing what's going on with your like spawning season, knowing when to tell people not to go swim, stuff like that is pretty good and universal. And then we've done some really interesting partnerships to kind of try to zoom in on really often specific species to educate people about in specific migratory pathways. So this year we've been partnering with the Xerces Society and are specifically targeting landowners along the monarch migration pathway to educate them about things. And that has been mind-blowing, because I went into that, so naively, just thinking, oh, let's just tell them they have to stop with the Roundup, and they've got to plant milkweed and other pollinator foods, right? Like it sounds so simple when you just start talking. We have an ecologist on staff, right? And so I kind of like understood enough of the science to be like, cool, that sounds like objectively simple. Like the research is clear. Stop with the Roundup, plant the milkweed and the pollinators. Like, let's do this. And what we learned through a bunch of these conversations is, for a lot of these landowners, they would love to stop spraying Roundup. They have family members dying from Roundup. They know that, but they don't have a pathway off of it. They don't know how to get off of it without going bankrupt and losing everything. And so we've been having some really hard and interesting conversations with the Xerces team and with some of our landowners on how to navigate that, and something I am very interested in. If anyone in this group has either research or people currently working on, is like, what does that off-ramp from Roundup look like? How do we get people off of that? Or at least to really be able to lessen their dependency on it. So that's one example of ecological guidance. We've also done some programs where we'll partner a scientist up with an Indigenous ecological knowledge expert, and they'll both go actually visit the land, walk the land, do a survey of the different biodiversity, but then also share more on the history and kind of the contemporary Indigenous perspective on land management. And what was really cool with that program we did was, that was just step one. And then we were going to, kind of figure it out from there and think about how to encourage people to change behavior based on that data. And what we saw was that 100% of the enrolled landowners proactively asked for ways to change behavior without us even getting to that step. Because as soon as they knew, oh my gosh, I didn't know I had this endangered desert tortoise on my land, they immediately want to know what to do about it. And so again, I think we just see so much come from that education element that really does result in that pilot. Every single landowner made changes to their land management to better protect their biodiversity, every single one.
That's cool that it's like about providing that off-ramp. Giving an alternative way to do something.
Totally. And figuring out, like, working with them to see how do we actually do that.
Yeah. Well, that kind of comes into play with Kendall's question, which is similar in the sense he said he just downloaded the app. So you have another user there.
Thank you.
And he says, does your app include a search criteria for camps with types of wildlife that you might see nearby? Or maybe if you want to particularly have an experience with a certain animal, can you put it in the search and then up pops a series of different campsites?
Yeah, cool question. Answer's not yet. We do have a filter specifically for camps that are really good for wildlife viewing. And then the host often lists, like kind of in a list format, like what you might get lucky enough to see there. But I'm currently talking to iNaturalist right now to hopefully build very similar to what you're asking for there, which would be kind of a more integrated data set around the different biodiversity on different lands. We'll also be looking, I'll do a quick plug, this is very early, but we are looking to do a series of really like not events, like a program, an ongoing program where we want to get more people out on the land and measuring biodiversity and doing bioblitzes where we can index different species, especially on private land, which often doesn't have great data on it yet, and kind of fill in some of the gaps for that big global biodiversity map. So that's something we'll be working on this oncoming year. One more thing I wanted to say about the monarchs that I think really, again, shows the power of how recreation can support conservation. Because we are a platform that helps these landowners make money, right? We deposit money in their bank account every week. When we say, hey, monarch butterflies are important, we want you to take this program, enroll in this series of educational seminars, complete this pledge, get this certificate. Thousands of them said, yep, sign me up. If you say it's important, we want to do it. On top of that, we are giving them a special promotion, right? So they're on our homepage, we're linking to them, we're doing extra marketing. There's a whole map where you can see the hosts who have signed this monarch protection pledge and are actually taking actions to support them. And so again, I just think that economic incentive is something that is so easy to overlook, but is so powerful in actually creating the change that we need at scale.
Yeah, I have to say it's really exciting. Just from our side, we do a lot of research and been working with communities to figure out how to, do nature positive. And it typically is in communities that have a history of being involved with extractive resources. And at the end of the day, everybody needs to put food on the table. And I think what Hipcamp does is it really does provide an alternative. So this is really exciting. Kind of building on that responsible recreation bit, you sort of talked about how you educate the landowners, but does Hipcamp play any sort of a role in promoting responsible recreation to campers and educate recreationists on how to be responsible stewards of the land when they're hanging out there and camping?
Absolutely. So there's a lot built into our product, into our checkout flow, that really encourages this ethos of leave it better, which to us is a very intentional play on leave no trace, which we also love and think is important. But how can we take it even one step forward further and maybe pick up trash that you didn't leave but someone else did, or something like that. So that is a big focus for the company. We actually are the founders of the California chapter of Recreate Responsibly, which has led a lot of the national work around responsible recreation, especially around COVID. So both through that organization, which is called Recreate Responsibly, as well as through our own product and materials, we are constantly investing in that. Because again, from a business perspective, to just connect the dots back to the economics, if those guests aren't showing up in a good way and having a positive impact on the land, our hosts are not going to invite them back. They will quit. And so we're very aligned in wanting to make sure people have the right mindset and the right education to show up safely. And with a good impact. You'll also never see us, we'll never do like a partnership with a beer or whiskey company. There's a lot we do really intentionally to make sure we're not promoting this, like, let's party in the outdoors, which personal opinions aside, whiskey can be great, but it's just not something that we're really going to promote as a way to market the brand or the company. That's not kind of how we want to reach people. We want them to show up with the right mindset and kind of knowledgeable about how to have a good time, but also be responsible while they do.
Have you had any negative or have your landowners had any negative experiences? And, kind of sounds like there's a way or a mechanism through which they can walk. I don't know if it's sort of like Airbnb where you have people comment on what they're like as guests and just getting a sense as to that side of this whole equation.
Yeah. So our rate of any kind of negative experience is way, well below any other kind of benchmark for marketplaces, I think, because of how intentional we're being about how we grow and how we don't grow. We do have a two-way review system. So campers can review hosts and hosts can review campers and vice versa. And then we do have a team that handles any kind of, escalation. The most common escalation to us, which this will shock you. You can't imagine what it is, but the most kind of common damage that happens when it does happen, which is really rare, is camper vans or RVs and trees. They back up into a little sapling or a fruit tree or something like that. So that is our most common kind of negative interaction with the habitat of the land. In that case, we have an insurance policy, we have a protection program, and so we're supporting the landowner financially in those situations.
That's great. You touched on a little bit about Indigenous communities, and there's a couple of questions with regards to this. Do you ever ask the local tribes to help with education about historical and cultural uses for the land, and or do you have any Indigenous communities who actually post and have some of their land as campsites?
Yeah, so we do work with some tribes who host, which is really exciting. We're working through some regulations there that are really complex. And again, knowing this group, if anyone has any information, I'd love to learn about it. But apparently there are federal laws that restrict the ways that tribes can earn income on their land. And camping might not be one of the ways that they're allowed to earn income, which is really interesting. So we are working with some tribes, but working through some regulatory concerns there. In terms of broader educational opportunity, we are very interested. Like I said, we've brought Indigenous traditional ecological knowledge experts out to landowners in particular to really educate them about their land and the broader picture and the habitat they have and how it connects. So we will continue to do that. And I am very excited for this upcoming year to think about how we might bring that to the broader camper side of the community as well. And so, like I said, with iNaturalists, looking to figure out how we can contribute to that, amazing map of biodiversity that can help, organizations like Y2Y figure out which parcels are most important to go after and support. We also would want to include the Indigenous perspective in that as well. I'm really inspired by Robin Wall Kimmerer and the idea that we can have both science and Indigenous knowledge side by side, and that's actually really maybe the best way to give us the full 360 perspective on land management and wildlife protection.
That's really great. Vivian has asked, are you connecting with local political groups to create public government support of your conservation efforts?
Yes. If anyone we should connect with, let me know. But yeah, we do have a government relations team. In general, what we've learned is in most parts of the country, this is either totally okay already given existing code, or more in a bit of a gray area. And so, where it is more in a gray area and this isn't explicitly allowed or not allowed, that's where we're reaching out to educate regulators about how recreation can, support the economy, bring in tourism dollars, not put pressure on local housing, and then also, support their landowners with some income that can create better land management and more intact ecosystems, which is really important.
This is a really interesting question, and if I don't explain it properly, George, please, type a little bit of an explanation into the chat. But the question is, if putting people onto the land makes them want to conserve biodiversity, you'd expect to see that reflected in a city's comprehensive plan. But the ones that George has looked at, the plans are relatively silent. There are well-developed recreational plans, but few or no conservation plans. Is that your experience?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, I suppose it sounds like the question is more with regards to, in some of the this, proximity or within the cities that you are camping in. If there is a swell of people who are out camping and engaging in this kind of recreation, you think that there'd be more social capital for having stronger conservation plans within those communities. But from his perspective, it seems as though that's not necessarily the case. I'm just wondering if you've seen that, I guess, that correlation between people recreating and having enough of a groundswell of support for that type of thing and actually having plans within, cities, towns, communities, MDs, even perhaps, or counties that do have a stronger focus on conservation.
Yeah. Within an urban area, I probably don't have any immediate examples of that. I mean, I think what I've seen in the research is that, cities are actually really important to conservation because we can put lots of people in small acreage. That's much better than them sprawling out forever and ever with fences and driveways and grass that they spray with Roundup 4 times a year and all that. So I think cities play a really important role in the conservation landscape by providing, you know, a high volume of affordable housing that is accessible to work and food and other key infrastructure. But yeah, I guess I don't know what like a city's conservation plan would look like. I tend to think about it more as like city states, like where I live, which has an incredible amount of really well-funded conservation. We're incredibly lucky. I believe Marin County is 90-something% protected at this point. It's because San Francisco loves getting outside, right? So like the city of San Francisco having such a love for nature and so much money has absolutely created this broader like city state with a lot of incredible conservation at play. So I don't know what it would look like inside of the city. I think it's a really cool futuristic prompt and question, but certainly like with and around cities, I think there's a strong correlation there.
Awesome. Well, we have exactly 1 minute left. So if just as a reminder, we will be passing out this recording tomorrow in an email. And so if you would like to share this talk with anyone, by all means, please do so. This is such a great message to get out there. And I love the idea personally, as well as professionally from my experience with Y2Y. And I'm guessing Jane will probably feel the same since the museum's mission and our mission are so intimately intertwined. But, you know, giving an opportunity for sort of a nature positive world where people are empowered and intertwining economy and conservation is really an exciting thing. So send that message loud and wide. And by all means, if you have any questions in the email, we'll give you the opportunity to be able to pose those, and we will try and get those answers to you as much as possible. Alyssa, keep doing this great work. And I know we'll probably be in touch sooner rather than later. You've given me lots of good ideas.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks again, everyone, for joining. And I was going to say, I'm actually putting my email in the chat now. So if you have follow-up questions or thoughts, I would welcome continuing the conversation.
Awesome. And if you have any, also, if you have any questions for either Jane or I, we'd be happy to respond to those as well. I know that, you know, the museum is a huge supporter of conservation and does such a great job with sending out the message of nature to its community members and visitors to the museum. And we're hoping to get out there live and in person next year, sooner rather than later. And of course, Yellowstone to Yukon is has a deep connection and services communities to help them coexist with wildlife as well. And it's a really big part of the work that we do to connect and protect this incredible habitat. So I will put my email in there in case anybody would like to send a message. And Jane, you can send yours as well. And again, you'll be getting an email tomorrow with the recording. Thanks so much, everyone. And we hope that you will join us for more amazing presentations like this for the interconnection series with the National Museum of Wildlife and Art and Y2Y until 2023. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Happy holidays.